Hello, everybody. Welcome to the first of a couple of lectures on the nervous system. You all have made it through exam 1 and exam 2 and lab practical 1, so we are moving right along. Admittedly, the nervous system can be difficult, so I'm just going to refer you to your study guide. Keep your studying at the level of the study guide, and you'll do best. There are many slides that I will likely just pause on, or you can pause if you want to look at some of the details. I find that this textbook and a lot of the new accessible PowerPoints are putting lots of words on one slide, and on the next slide, the figure that you need to look at. So sometimes I replace or I put the figure, that you want to look at first, and then some of the terms, and you can pause the lecture if you want to look at that. So let's get you all through the nervous system. Cardiac or the cardiovascular and digestive systems are going to be easier, and that will be in our first part of Study Guide 4. So let's move along. Nervous system. We already reviewed a little bit of this when we were going over all of the systems just briefly, but essentially your nervous system is designed to take in information and process that information very quickly. So classically defined as receives and processes sensory information from both external and internal environments. So that includes knowing what temperature it is outside, if you're holding a pen, that you can actually feel the material that pen is made up of. Certainly it allows for you to sense and see and hear all your senses. Inside of your body, it is essentially, like if you have too much food in your stomach, there are some pressure receptors that are there to sense that. So the nervous system essentially is this high-level computer with sensors all over your body, and it's taking in that information from the peripheral nervous system and sending it to the central nervous system and deciding what to do with it. So think of it that way. The two major divisions, the central nervous system. This is going to remind you of the axial skeleton. The central nervous system is the brain and spinal cord, so it's this main axis. And the peripheral nervous system is that lies with outside of the central nervous system. So those are our nerves, and essentially receptors that are involved in sensing from your external and internal environments. So central nervous system, peripheral nervous system, and they communicate with one another. Okay, so if we simply kind of just take an overview look of the nervous system, this is essentially what's going to happen. You have your sensors, not only like your sense organs involving their particular sensors, but sensors in your skin, sensors in your stomach, your bladder, so on. And so these sensors are going to respond to whatever stimuli that they might be detecting, and then sending that from the peripheral nervous system to the central nervous system. And it does that by weak electrical signals, or what they say, nerve signals, alongside neurotransmitters. So we will dig down deep in like the neuron and the synapse and sending messages from one neuron to the next a little bit later in this lecture series. Okay, then there's integration. So this is essentially the central nervous system is taking in that information. So it goes from the peripheral nervous system, or the sensory division of the peripheral nervous system, to the central nervous system. The central nervous system is going to do something called integration. It's going to take all the input that it receives, and then it's going to store memories, and then it's going to create motor responses. Okay, what is the motor? Motor division is part of the peripheral nervous system, and this is what's going to happen when there is information to go back from the central nervous system to the peripheral nervous system to cause something to happen. And the way your book defines it is that the motor division of the peripheral nervous system generates motor output. So this could be your muscles. So you're moving your foot off of something sharp. It could be your glands that are responding to, what if you just slammed on your brakes while you were coming into an intersection because someone had run their red light? So it could be essentially the rushing of adrenaline from your adrenal glands into your bloodstream. So that is a motor response. Another one could be simply that we are telling various organs, whatever that might be, that they need to contract and move, materials through. So that happens when the integration part of the central nervous system says, oh, something needs to happen to the motor division or within the motor division. And so that's how we're going to have the central nervous system affecting muscles, glands, and organs. Okay, pictures tell 1,000 words. So here we go, the central nervous system, the brain. Then you can see the spinal cord. Now, what's hard to tell in this figure is essentially the color. So see how you probably can't tell this because this is a really poorly colored figure here, but the spinal cord looks like it's a little more peachy color along with the brain. So that is the central nervous system. Our nerves, cranial nerves coming directly off of the brain and going to the cranium, so going to our sense organs on our face, the cranial nerves and the spinal nerves. So those are these bundles of neurons that are exiting out the spinal cord and going directly to the various organs of the body. Cranial nerves and spinal nerves are part of the peripheral nervous system. So this figure really should have color coded that just a bit better, but brain and spinal cord are the central nervous system, and your cranial and spinal nerves and receptors are part of the peripheral nervous system. Okay, another figure depicting this information. So let's take a look. So we have the central nervous system here in this peach colored box, and below it in the larger box, kind of in a yellowish color, is the peripheral nervous system. The two parts of the central nervous system, the brain and spinal cord, you can see arrows going back and forth because the spinal cord brings information to the brain. The brain, when there is a motor output, sends information back out to the spinal cord. Okay, in the box it says peripheral nervous system. I want to take a look. Then here on the left-hand side, we have two kinds of nerves. The sensory nerves, or afferent nerves. Sensory nerves bringing information from your senses, from your receptors, from those parts of your body, sensing the environment, is going to be carried directly into the spinal cord and then to the brain. And so that is part of this, what I call the sensory division of the peripheral nervous system. Then if there is a motor response, then information is going to go from the brain, the spinal cord, and now it is going to move out what we call motor or efferent nerves, and that's carrying information from the central nervous system to what we call the effectors. So muscles, glands, and organs, wherever there's going to be an effect. Okay. So hopefully that's not too jarring for you. If I'm looking at the study guide, I'm seeing that I did not go any deeper into those particular nerves that are communicating or are part of the sensory nerves, or those nerves that are part of the motor nerves. But if you want to dig a little deeper because that helps you understand, go right ahead. And we can see here two things I did not put on the study guide, but essentially we have two parts of the motor division, the sympathetic and parasympathetic. So in a course like this, we like to give you a taste of a system so that you better understand it, so that you can better understand yourself. If you're moving on, then in a field where you need more anatomy and physiology, then you would take a Principles of A&P class. So, all right, moving right along. What is the nervous tissue made up of? It's made up of neurons. So you might remember we saw figures of that before. So we know the neuron is a specialized cell that transmit the nervous impulses, but there are supportive cells, and actually those supportive cells outnumber the actual neurons. And these are called the neuroglia cells or glial cells, and they support and nourish neurons. You can then subdivide into many different kinds of supportive cells to the neurons, but we're going to stop here. Okay, you should already know the anatomy of the neuron. You've got the central part of the neuron, looks like a star, has the nucleus, has the other organelles, And then you have short extensions that receive information into that cell body. And then you have a long extension of that neuron that is composed of the axon. So dendrites receive the information, usually from sensory receptors or nearby neurons, send that into the cell body, which integrates the information. One neuron can actually receive messages from hundreds of other neurons, so it has to decide what to do with that. Sometimes nothing happens, but if something happens, then now we're going to generate an electrical impulse that is going to move along the axon, sending that signal to its synapse. Okay. Couple other terms. Individual axons are called nerve fibers, but collectively, when we have a bundle of nerve fibers or axons, it forms a nerve. Okay, so we've covered this. This is a slide that if you want to pause and read, I'm going to move forward. Okay, so a figure. What we see here is generally kind of an idea of how you might imagine, a signal being sent. Let's just say this sensory receptor is detecting a sharp object that's along the skin. So this sensory receptor, which is actually a free dendrite, detects that. It generates an electrical impulse. It's going to move along some structure into the cell. This is shown as a sensory neuron. Then it's going to send it along the axon to a nearby neuron. In this case, it's an interneuron. So here we have a sensory neuron that is part of the motor division. A sensory neuron, part of the sensory division of the peripheral nervous system, sending its signal to an interneuron that is making up the central nervous system. And then that neuron decides what to do with the information and sends it back out, in this case, by an axon that intercepts a motor neuron. And then that electrical signal is going to be picked up again and moved along the axon. So that's generally how things would flow. Obviously, this is a very simplistic representation because certainly, there's not just one neuron. Occasionally that can be the case, like in the example of a reflex, but generally it's going to involve more neurons than just 3. Okay. So this is a super cool thing about axons. They are wrapped in a fatty myelin sheath or a fatty sheath, lipid sheath. And essentially, this is going to help the signal be sent along the axon. Now note, there are gaps in the myelin sheath, and so as this electrical signal is being sent along the neuron, these gaps are going to help speed up the actual message. So it's kind of an odd thing to think about, that a system would need to be designed such that signals can be sent rapidly, and the nervous system is definitely one of the quickest of our systems. These lipid myelin cells, called Schwann cells, essentially then are wrapping around that axon. So you'll see these little spaces called the node of Ranvier, and essentially that is going to help, again, speed up the signal. Long axons tend to have that, short ones don't bother. Okay, when you hear gray matter and white matter, gray matter is essentially because the central nervous system is gray and it lacks myelinated axons, but white matter does in fact make the axons look white because they do have that myelinated sheath. So here is a little picture. So we see that Schwann cell wrapped around the axon, kind of like the insulating material of an electrical cord. But there's spaces here. You wouldn't want that in your electrical cord, but this is going to help speed up the reaction. So we know that there are a number of diseases or disorders that occur when the myelin sheath is broken down or interrupted. And one of those is multiple sclerosis. So when you have a breakdown of the myelin sheath, it means that the neurons can't transmit the information. And so what you end up having is kind of herky-jerky movements, or the signal is not getting to where it needs to be. So it's going to cause that communication, especially to the muscles, to be interrupted. Okay, we will stop here since we're at 14 minutes and 50 seconds, and I will see you in the next video.